Assalamu alaikum, ladies, gentlemen, my fellow brothers, sisters, and all learners. This video is an updated version of one of my most watched videos, which is called the 7 Critical Tips on CIMA SCS Writing. Why I decided to update that, which now is not 7 but 10 critical tips, is because when I took a recent look at it, and when I looked at it based on the experiences and based on the learnings that I've had, especially with respect to reviewing mocks and mock attempts of learners, I figured that there are some critical tips that I've missed. So I wanted to add them and give you a sort of reminder. And here we go. This is 10 critical tips on CIMA SCS writing. Let's take a look. Tip number 1 is non-negotiable: know your role. You are the senior financial manager of whatever company that you're assigned through the pre-scene. You don't have time to waste. You don't waste others' time as well. So this is an important concept. Whenever you get a paper and you have a variant, a task to answer, you are sent this task most of the time. Most frequently, it's the CFO. And if the CFO is the one who is writing to you, they don't have time to waste. This is a very important part, because when you're developing your answer, you cannot take or you cannot spend unnecessarily, right, a lot of time unnecessarily writing anything, any details that are irrelevant, anything that would deviate the focus of the reader away from the requirement. None of that is required. None of that is essential. None of that should be done. It is actually detrimental to your benefit and to your gain. So please make sure that you understand that you don't have time to waste and you don't waste others' time. You are taken seriously because you're the senior financial manager, and therefore you must act like it, which means in your written presentation you have to write as if you're the senior financial manager. You have to have accountability. There has to be weight in what you say. There has to be importance embedded within the things that you say. You have to prioritize based on the circumstance, based on the situation. You have to basically prioritize. It's a very important aspect. Prioritize what you need to write. So remember, tip number 1, know your role. Tip number 2 is know the co-activities. So this is a little bit of a technical aspect, but it's very, very important, because this is how you will be reviewed. So you will get maybe between 7 to 9 subtasks throughout the entire paper, and you're reviewing. The marker or the examiner will review your response through these co-activities. So it is imperative that you have a good handle on what the co-activities are. CIMA tests your skill through 5 co-activities. All 5 of them are tested in the strategic level. You must prove that you can, right? And it has to be spread out across 5. They are not theory tests. The SCS or the strategic case study does not test for theoretical knowledge. It is a skill test. So the co-activities, you will notice why they are termed you can is because it's really just checking whether you have that right amount of skill, and at that particular co-activity, can you perform it to exceed expectations, the expectations that CIMA has for you, and through that, do you have the necessary skill? Every subtask in your paper links to a specific one of these. So you can actually check it out by looking at some of the post-examination guides. You will realize that each and every single subtask has a connected co-activity to it, and CIMA will not or cannot promote you if you are not sufficiently skilled. Now, I want to give you a quick summary on the co-activities. As you can see, co-activity A is business strategy. Can you develop business strategy? B is evaluating business ecosystem and business environment. C is recommend financing strategies. D is evaluate and mitigating risk. E is recommending and maintaining a sound control environment. So this is very important. One thing that you have to do is just take a good look at this and see, do you have any weak areas, right? So especially if you look at some of the sub skills that they test within the co-activities, co-activity A, it's about whether you can evaluate strategic options. Can you recommend strategies? Can you evaluate acquisitions or divestment strategies? And can you recommend opportunity and threat responses, including digital strategy? That is what is tested under A. B, business ecosystem, right? Environment is a very important part, the ecosystem we are operating. So can you select and apply suitable strategic tools? Can you do stakeholder analysis and respond as management? Can you respond to various stakeholders in the appropriate manner? Can you respond to ecosystem changes? Can you recommend KPIs for strategic management? And can you respond to economic, political, and currency risks? These are what are tested. These are the skills that are tested under co-activity B. Co-activity C is a fairly straightforward one. It's about financing strategies. So can you evaluate the suitability of sources of finance, the various ones, especially debt and equity? And under them, there are so many different branches, sub-branches that you have to learn because different circumstances require different responses. Can you recommend dividend policy? Because there are multiple dividend policies to choose from, and you have to really be able to evaluate a situation and understand if the current dividend policy is good, bad, what are your thoughts about it, and would you suggest something else? Or if they want to, really maybe go for a new funding, then cutting off dividends or changing the dividend policy would be something the examiner looks at. In that situation, they would ask for your advice. So can you recommend dividend policy? Can you recommend and apply business valuation models? Is another area that is heavily tested and heavily looked at. But mind you, I want to remind you again, the SCS doesn't really go into the technicalities of it. That's already covered in the OTQ. So they don't really get you to do the calculations. But one thing they definitely do is they try to understand if you have the right kind of, thinking, right? Can you really evaluate a situation and identify if this is the right way to go, if this is the way to value the business, if the value that someone has pitched to you is fair, if it's not fair, why? These are the things they test under that particular skill. D is evaluating and mitigating risk. So this is a very, very important part. Takes up a lot of work. Here you are checked whether you can evaluate and respond to certain risks that the businesses face. Every variant has a risk question. There is always going to be one subtask or two or three minimum that you are facing a situation where you are facing risk. So you should be able to evaluate it and respond to it. Can you manage the risk register, which is almost always given in the pre-scene document? And you have to also be able to evaluate in your pre-scene analysis if the pre-scene's risk register is sufficient. Does it cover all of the risks, or else can we really go for an expansive option? Can you identify ethical dilemmas and respond accordingly? Ethics, right? The corporate ethics, the personal ethics, business ethics, all of these are important. You have to have been able to, or you have to have rather studied what ethical responses are. How do you evaluate a situation? Evaluate and mitigate cyber risk. So cyber risk has become a more prominent area in the strategic case study exam. If you have taken a look at recent papers, you know this very well. So you have to be able to evaluate cyber risks and come up with necessary or appropriate responses to managing cyber risks as well. Recommend internal controls, right? So that is the final part, which is a big chunk of the P3 syllabus and which leads to the final co-activity as well. Because when it comes to management of risk, right, which is under co-activity D, one way to manage risk or mitigate risk is to have a proper internal control system in place. So that is why you have the recommendation of internal controls under co-activity D. So don't get it confused. Co-activity E is about recommending and maintaining a sound control environment. So that is overall the maintenance of control to ensure business continuity in a sense that the business would be a going concern, that the business is not in jeopardy. In that sense, can you apply internal audit resources, which is a primary team that is available for you to maintain a sound control environment? Can you evaluate the implications of compliance failures? What if, internally there are compliance failures? Can you really respond to that? Can you really evaluate the extent to which it is going to cause damage, etc., etc.? Can you respond to threats of poor corporate governance, right? Which is most of the time any kind of unethical behavior, any kind of illogical, illegal kind of behavior, or anything that is against the corporate values, and most importantly the corporate governance code, which is about 25% of your P3 syllabus that you learn, anything that goes against it. So by default there is a tendency that the examiner expects you for the strategic case study to understand that the company is following the UK's corporate code of governance, which means that you have to be able to evaluate the company and its situation from that angle, from that perspective of whether it is following the code properly. That brings me to tip number 3. Know the requirement. Perhaps by far, considering my experience, this is in terms of getting into the writing, this is the most important tip that you will probably get from me or anyone. You have to know the requirement, you have to know the purpose. You have to respond to this with a simple structure. You are asked a question, so you must answer it. The question, so it's a Q&A model, right? So you have to understand the question. You cannot or shouldn't answer unasked questions because the purpose isn't served. They want you to very specifically, they're not going to test you the entire syllabus, and they're not going to test you something that you're good at. They have very specific requirements which are specified in the question. So you have to be able to take a look at the question, apply your knowledge, and respond exactly to that. Not anything that you imagined, not anything that is not asked. It has to be a response to the question that is asked. You have no time to waste to do this. You cannot answer. You cannot, absolutely not. You have no room to write, no possibility to write a response if you do not understand the requirement, which is why the first step in writing is understanding the requirement. Know the purpose, know why you're writing whatever you're going to write. So read and read and read again. Very, very important. Because looking at my experience, right, when you look at, even you can do this, just take a past variant, go through the subtasks across an entire variant. You will notice that there are about 3 to 4 tasks that are very easy to understand. They are very straightforward. Whether should we go ahead with debt or equity? Very, very straightforward. But there will always be a couple of questions, couple of subtasks, which are a little tricky, right? How do you think we should justify that the board should be blamed for this particular incident? That kind of line of questioning is where you have to be very, very careful, because you have to kind of read the room, read the requirement, understand the context, apply your knowledge and apply your experience to really get what they're asking, and then respond to it. So read again until you understand the requirement. If you still don't understand it, read again and then read again. Tip number 4 is know your company, pre-scene. So this is why they send you the pre-scene a couple of months before. So it's very important, because you have to be, tip number 1, right, know your role. So you're a senior finance manager of that company, so you have to know your company. You're a senior management level employee of the assigned company. You are expected to be a good agent by default, right? You are, you're facing CIMA. CIMA has its own ethical code. CIMA works very closely with, promoting corporate governance all across the world. So you are supposed to be a good agent. You are expected to have a sound knowledge of your company and its current position. And you must be mindful of your company's well-being and the future sustainability aspect. So when you are writing a response, you're writing as if you're an insider of that company. You have to know this company inside out. You have to know it really well. So this is where the pre-scene analysis work becomes really, really important. Don't forget it. Don't miss it. The best thing to do is to start by reading it, right? They are very thorough normally. Every pre-scene document is very thorough. Just read it a few times, then it will get etched into your mind, and then thereafter you can start analyzing as well with further support. Tip number 5 is know the context. And by context, what I mean is the unseen, the variant. At the day of the exam, right, when you are facing the exam on the monitor, on the display screen, you're going to get the question. And this question is not going to just be the straight up question, right? They're going to pitch you a story. They're going to tell you that you're going through a certain circumstance. That is context. Context is very, very, very important when it comes to the strategic case study exam. How can you deal with a situation if you don't understand the situation, right? How can you really, respond to a particular threat, even evaluate a certain outcome or evaluate a certain option that we are considering without really knowing the situation? The situation or the scene is set on the exam day, and that is done through the unseen. You must take great care to clearly understand what is going on, right? You have to really take an effort, make a good effort to read the requirement properly, read the task, read the unseen properly, and understand, as you're reading, understand what is going on. You have to get it. In that context, you have to respond. So you must understand fast as well. That is very important, because you have limited time. You only have 60 minutes to write or respond to one task, right? So one task takes up 60 minutes. Within the 60 minutes, you have to read, you have to understand, you have to plan, you have to write, you have to do a lot of these things. So the first step is to understand. So you have to understand fast. That is where practice comes in. And then you must act and respond quickly as well. So the response, right, especially in the form of writing that you do, you have to do it within the allocated time frame, which means that you have to do that fast. So there is a little bit of that urgency kicking in when you're trying to develop an answer. So please make sure that you understand the context. If you write things either out of context or just purely technical, right, you're just writing theory, you're just writing random things that you remember, you will not pass this exam. Everything that you do, this is where you would have seen elsewhere, I would have been talking about something called application. Is very important. Application happens through the context. You have to apply the situation. Tip number 6 is you have to know that time is limited. So this is very closely connected to tip number 5, where you have to kind of respond fast. That comes with the consciousness that you know that time is limited. It's a 3-hour exercise, right? It's a 3-hour exercise, 1 hour per task. So it's a limited frame, and 3 hours isn't seemingly much, but honestly, a lot is at stake, right? Your investment, probably a lot of hard work you put in over the years. This is all at stake, which means you have to make sure that you give your best shot and achieve the best possible result within the 3 hours. This limited time, right? Perhaps you've been, fighting with CIMA for 10 years or a decade or 5 years or whatever. Despite all of that effort, you're going to be judged on a 3-hour merit, on what you perform, what you display within a 3-hour frame, like almost all competitive exams in the world. While that seems unfair, whether you're deserving or not, that limited time decides. Which is why, I kind of doubt whether it's fair, but that's life. That's how things work, and it's not only for you, it's for everyone, right? So it's fair game. If you mismanage time, CIMA won't have confidence in you that you deserve to be promoted. That is where you have to be conscious of your time. You have to learn how to manage the time properly. You have to come up with little techniques for yourself, depending on your reading, the speed reading, or your ability to read fast, your ability to grasp as you're reading, your ability to plan an answer and how long it takes to plan an answer, and your ability to write a response. All of these things, you have to have a good judge of yourself. Where are you actually? And based on that, you have to really manage the time effectively in a way that you give the examiner what they want. Tip number 7, you have to master writing, right? The expression, end of the day, for this exam is in written form. You have to write an answer, right? You don't have to speak out an answer. You can't verbally present. You're not pitching a PowerPoint presentation. You're writing an answer, which means you have to understand that writing is a skill you need to face this paper successfully. And you're writing for whom? For the examiner to read. So this is really not about, kind of writing a blog or writing a book or writing an article. Not that. It's about writing for the examiner to read. So ultimately your game is satisfying the examiner. And if the examiner cannot understand, if the examiner is not satisfied, you cannot pass. So you must write for the examiner to understand. Whenever you're writing, every sentence you're writing, every word you're writing, it has to cater to that examiner mindset. This is why, even in my coaching program, what I do is we try to embed a good understanding, a very thorough understanding of how does the examiner think. And we try to get into the examiner's head. If you really can judge that, and if you can really understand this is what the examiner is expecting, and that you can do with your previous experience, with the analysis, with the kind of coaching support I provide, and with the kind of questions they give you, right, with the scene they set. If you really understand that and you can write for the examiner to understand, we're good. So the writing must be simple, clear, to the point, accurate, well informed, and concise. So pay attention to these terms. It should be simple and it should be easily understood. It should be clear. Clarity is a very important quality of good writing, and to the point, right? Number 1, nobody has time to waste. Not you, not the reader, not the examiner. So you have to give answers to the point. It has to be accurate, right? Of course, inaccurate answers are not going to be accepted. It has to be well informed. So you are someone who is experienced. You're supposed to be professionally competent. So your answer has to display that. and it has to be concise, right? You cannot really, and basically conciseness actually also is automatically embedded with the time frame or the time limitation that you have. But let's say, you know, you're the fastest typist in the world and you can type within 3 hours you can type 9,000 words. That doesn't help, that won't help, right? Just type the average fair number of words. I don't want to really put a number to your mouth at this stage, but figure out exactly the reasonable number of words, and you have to do the best job writing a simple, clear, to the point, accurate, well-informed answer within that word limit. Tip number 8 is write clearly. So I really wanted to express or kind of, you know, stress on this aspect, because there's an important tool that will help us write clearly. I see a lot of sentences generally that are either unfinished, incomplete, they are rush jobs, right, with great but lost potential. This leads to a lack in clarity, and the strategic case study expects clarity. Your CFO or your examiner generally expects clarity. So always make sure that you finish your sentences. You know that a basic sentence has a subject, object and verb, but let's not get into the grammar of things, but make sure that you write full sentences. Fuller sentences is a common term that CIMA examiner uses. They say that they expect fuller sentences. So write a full sentence, practice writing a full sentence. And another way that you can help, or that will be easy for the examiner to navigate your answer, is if you keep your paras relatively concise and short, right? So you don't write a paragraph of, you know, 350 words, but you write a paragraph of 100 or 150, maybe 5, 6, maximum 8, 9 sentences. And within that frame, if you cannot, you know, provide a unique idea, a single idea, a singular idea, then it's really questionable whether you are, you know, whether you have practiced enough, whether your writing is really up to that standard. So within, you know, that kind of sentence count, you should be able to communicate that particular idea. And we usually advise you to maintain paragraphs and para breaks across the different points. Do not write multiple points in the same paragraph. So if you have a new point, just move to the next point. Next paragraph. In that sense, make sure that you write full paragraphs using full sentences. And generally, now for example, in the writing coaching sessions that I do, we discuss extensively of how do we write a good paragraph. If you have joined my, you know, writing coaching, the free sessions that I do, I've extensively talked about it. But really think, if you're someone who is self-learning, really think, go back to what you've written, really think, are your paragraphs up to the standard? Do they serve justice to what is needed to be presented? Tip number 9 is another thing that will help you write a clear, concise and to the point, accurate answer. Know the ask, know what they are asking. And how do they ask? The most common form of asking is using the verb. The examiner uses verbs to clarify their expectation. And if you misunderstand the verb, you misunderstand the requirement. Carefully study and familiarize yourself with the verbs. What are the most common verbs? Here you go. CIMA has actually given to you in the strategic blueprint, the case study blueprint, which is there for all the case studies and all the OTQs. But in the SCS blueprint, they have given you the table of verbs. And for the strategic case study, the relevant verbs are level 4 and level 5. And even in level 5 and level 4 verbs, there are very frequently used, very commonly used verbs, and you have to really dive deep into the understanding of these verbs. I'll tell you the most common verbs. They ask you to advise. They also ask you to assess. Very frequently they ask you to evaluate and recommend. And in addition to that, we see discuss, the verb discuss being used, and also occasionally you might see the term develop, compare and contrast, but it's advise, assess, evaluate, recommend, discuss. These are the verbs that you get to see in the strategic case study exam for the most part. Do you really understand what these verbs mean? Because if they want you to advise, you shouldn't be evaluating. If they want you to recommend, you shouldn't be justifying. If they want you to assess, you shouldn't be explaining. Right? So these are very important aspects to consider. Now, while this definition set is clear, and does a reasonable job, it doesn't do a complete job. There are multiple sources. Even in fact, in my couple of my other videos, I've attached, especially in the I think in the 5 reasons why students fail, I've attached associated to that video a further extended verb list. In fact, what I'll do is this. You know what? I'm going to create a folder, and I'm going to share that folder with anyone. You can check the link of that folder in the description section of this, and just click on it, and you can get access to that verb definition set. You can download it, you can check it out and read it and really understand what the verbs mean. I hope that helps. Finally, tip number 10, very important, you have to write confidently. This is the strategic case study or the strategic level exam and the final hurdle to become a chartered management accountant. You must prove to CIMA first that you're a capable individual, you know of what you're speaking, you know what you're doing, and that CIMA can trust you to hold their designation and represent them in the world of management. So if CIMA has to, kind of do that, then you have to give them what they want at the level they want it. So if you've done the work, right, most probably if you are in the point of writing or facing the SCS exam, it means you can, right? It means you already are eligible to be a chartered management accountant. You just have to go through this hurdle to get the certificate, right, to get the label, which means you can do this. So be confident of your skill. The fact that you're here justifies that confidence that you need to have. But one thing, a word of caution, do not be overconfident, right? This is not about, being really kind of, I'm the guy. Not that kind of confident. Just be confident, fairly confident, reasonably confident of your skill. Walk into the exam with without any fear. Trust in your ability, and that will reflect in your writing. Express confidence in your writing. You have to write like a senior finance manager of a company, someone who is very high up, writing directly to the board in a company. You're a trusted person, so write confidently. A quick summary of the 10 tips. This is what we looked at. Know your role. You're a senior finance manager. Know the core activities, the 5 core activities: business, strategy, financing, risk, and internal control. Third one is know the requirement. Always take extra effort to understand the requirement. Fourth is know the company, whichever company that you get assigned to. Fifth is know the context. 6, know that time is limited. Be time conscious. Be aware that your time is ticking. There's a clock ticking. 7 is you have to master writing as a skill. You have to be very conscious. You have to practice mocks. You have to put in the effort. 8, write clearly. 9, you have to know the verbs. What exactly are the most frequent verbs that I use? Go through a few past papers. You can download that document I'm going to attach in the description section here. And 10, write confidently. And on top of that, I kind of want to add a few of my own personal tips here. The truth is that if you get 80 out of 150, that's about nearly 55%, you pass. So that's your target, right? You're not trying to satisfy the world, you're trying to satisfy the examiner. So let's do that. So you can approach it in a very materialistic, exam oriented mindset, and it all boils down to why you're doing CIMA. So my approach to things always is kind of chase excellence, be excellent in what you're doing. So I think, or I believe that why you're going through this entire ordeal is to become a skilled individual and also a skilled manager, right? You want to acquire the necessary skills to become a better person, better individual, and also a better manager end of the day in your company. Not to just get a piece of paper or a letter after your name, right? Nobody really end of the day cares about that. So this is a great opportunity that very few in the world get, right? And if you're watching this, and if you're really concerned about the SCS exam, you're one of those lucky few. Utilize it optimally. Use it to become a skilled manager. And I generally, right, personally, I would, and I've seen this in the general corporate sense, you generally respect a skilled manager, right? A manager with good skill, without the letters, even regardless of whether they have the letters or not. If you know that they are skilled, right, and if they're a relatively good human being, you respect them than just a mediocre or incompetent manager just with the letters. And this is always something that you notice in the corporate environment. So make the best out of this opportunity, learn and upskill yourself, right? Truly apply. There's a lot to learn when you're engaging with the strategic case study exam properly. It covers a lot of ground, and therefore make sure that you really try and become a skilled individual and manager. So that's it. As you know, this is all part of the CIMA SCS with AZB Coaching Program. I like to help students globally, and I hope that the updated 10 critical tips will be a good help and will also give you the right amount of confidence. Thank you very much, and happy learning. If you have any thoughts, any questions, anything that you might want me to address, you can comment. And if you want to join my program, just drop me an email. You'll find the email address, and you can just connect with me through any kind of social media, Facebook, Patreon, Instagram, even WordPress. So on that note, thank you so much. I sincerely hope that this video helps. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Peace be upon all of you and all your loved ones. God bless you, and take care.